Welcome one more day to Space in Armonía. Today's subject is very important, especially for those of you who are looking for a precise way to know in which point of the inner growth and self-discovery you are. Whether you are experienced and you feel stagnated and want something deeper, or you don't know exactly what you are looking for and would like to find a precise way to discover exactly what you have to do. This video will make clear many important points. This is the ABC of self-discovery. This helped me very much many years ago, and it continues to shed light on the process. Now, before going into the subject, I would like to indicate that you already have in the blog, themusicofwisdom.blogspot.com, some excerpts from a work which I mentioned in the previous video concerning soul group evolution. The ideas are attributed to Frederick Myers, even they were channeled in this work by an Irish medium known as Geraldine Cummings. And regardless of the accuracy of those claims, the ideas are very true because some of us have experienced the same. And to me, it's surprising that this information was already available in the West more than 100 years ago. I think something is growing in humanity, and we are discovering more and more details of what inner evolution really is. So I left a link in the comments of the previous video so you can have access to the excerpts. They are in the blog. You can access the blog as well. You have the links in the information box down below. And soul group evolution is very much connected to our particular growth. And we have to know how to evolve, really, without interruption, without losing ourselves in the way, something which is very easy, actually. Therefore, we have to know something that many years ago was very striking to me. It was around 1998, 1999, when I was about 17 years old, very young. And I was reading a work known as Fragments of an Unknown Teaching by P.D. Uspensky. He was presenting a teaching that was brought to the West by the Master of Dances G.I. Gurdjieff. He had been working with a group of seekers, and they found something really profound. And this teacher was allowed to bring this information to the West because it appears every time humanity is in serious trouble. And one of the first things that struck me concerning this teaching is that ordinary human beings cannot enter the true way of life from the scratch. Many people believe they can start a true spiritual way from the beginning. When they say you have to receive the Messiah or walk the way of Christ, whatever, they start what they believe as the way. But this is not precise, because in order to enter the way of life, you have to clear up very important things before, and you have to order the inner house. This process is a process of purification. This is present even in the New Testament. I found fragments of this teaching even in the Torah, but in the New Testament you will find the teaching I'm speaking about in a rather complete way, even though it has allegories that imply going inside. And Mr. Gurdjieff said that in order to enter the way, you have to climb a ladder. And to climb the ladder, first, you need to cross a first threshold. The first threshold is when you find a true guide and a true teaching, and even a group of people that work to access the way. In the ladder, there are no guarantees. You can fall. It's very easy to lose the track and to forget about the work you have to do. Actually, traditionally, there have been 3 ways which some people claim that lead to the true way of liberation, but as we will see, that's not actually the case. And Mr. Gurdjieff suggested there is a 4th path or a 4th way, which gives you glimpses of the true way. The first traditional paths are called the path of the Fakir. The path of the monk would be the second, and the path of the intellectual mystic or yogi, as Gurdjieff called it, would be the third. Now, the first path is a work on the body. There are masters in the East that reach quite an extraordinary control over their physical faculties, and they can perform what people call miracles. Sometimes they are just tricks, but they develop certain energies by means of physical discipline. In India, they call it tapas. They deprive themselves of food or certain passions, and they develop energetic faculties. Even those who practice certain forms of martial arts, such as Tai Chi or Qi Kung, can develop quite extraordinary control over the physical body, and that would be part of the first path. The second path is the path of the monk, the path of he who develops the heart, the emotions by means of devotion, by loving the divine. Here we find those who work in community, even mystics that work alone in isolation, committing themselves to the divine. And definitely you can know very profound dimensions that way, but this is not the true way mentioned by Ishu, because he didn't tell us to isolate ourselves with others or in a cave. He said, love one another as I love you. And one another means those who are working in the process. And obviously we can do that everywhere, not just in a monastery, wherever. Then we have the third traditional path. Gurdjieff called it the way of the yogi, but realize there are different kinds of yogis. I call it the way of the intellectual mystic or the occultist. In India, you'll find yogis that work devotionally, but many others choose the way of self-knowledge. You have the Raja yogis, which cultivate certain forms of meditation to reach states of enlightenment and experience samadhi, nirvana. Raja yogis try to merge with what they call Ishvara, the light father. But that's a path of mystical suicide, as I call it. because they don't preserve their personality. They just fuse with something they regard as the absolute. Now, I don't think that's really possible. In my view, there is a misunderstanding there. And I think Mr. Gurdjieff implied that in his way of presenting this teaching. Then you'll find the Nana yogis, those who try to remember their Atman, their true self, and they say Atman is Brahman, Atman is the absolute. Well, I think this is not true either, because the absolute implies developing something you cannot develop by means of the way of self-knowledge presented in those Vedic or Advaita Vedanta teachings, which are very popular nowadays. Then you will find other types of intellectual mystics, such as Hermeticists, alchemists, occultists, Kabbalists in general, and they practice all sorts of meditations. They can meditate on the names of God, or study the Torah, or some hermetic text, and they think they can develop true divine faculties that way, even working with others or getting involved in some form of ritual. There was a book known as The Way of Kabbalah, written by Rabbi Shimon ben Halevi, and there he says that the fourth way presented by Mr. Gurdjieff reminds him very much of some forms of Kabbalah. And I think obviously there are some echoes in the Torah and in Kabbalistic texts about the fourth way. But I don't think it's exactly the same, because the fourth way is very adaptative. It's not focused on just one book or one tradition as Jewish Kabbalah. There are different forms of Kabbalah, but the fourth way is more alive. It implies working with others, working with life, being more flexible, and having a more open mind. You'll find the difference in a while, but I have found some indications of the fourth way even in the Proverbs of Solomon. If you go to chapter 30, versicle 18, 19, you'll find Solomon saying, "Three ways are incomprehensible to me, and a fourth one is a mystery. The path of the boat on the water, the path of the serpent on the rock, the path of the eagle in the air, and the path of man or the human giver on the maiden, Alma." And I think he's really referring to the divine consciousness which is trapped in the unconscious. That's the maiden which has been exiled and even raped by the forces of this world. The exiled Shekinah, as it's known in Kabbalistic teachings. And the fourth way would try to liberate that divine consciousness, but in a way which is very alive. It implies using the shocks of life, receiving impressions of life, and what is more important, knowing the path and knowing all the adversaries you might have, a very precise knowledge of how the evolution takes place. And this is something we can see mirrored in different teachings. But there are specific thresholds we have to cross. The first threshold is when you find a true teacher and a true teaching. You cannot walk alone. You even have to work with others. And the second threshold is when you have already been going through a process of inner work and start to receive the baptism of fire. Now, this is also in the New Testament. John the Baptist said, I baptized you with water, but there comes another one that will baptize you with spirit and fire. The baptism of water is basically the first steps of the ladder when you cleanse certain elements from your psyche, when you start to organize your inner house with your subdelegate steward, with your delegate steward, with your conscience steward, as I present this in the harmony therapy course. And then you separate the wheat from the chaff, your false personalities from the true personality that starts to be aligned with the true divine self, which actually comes from the absolute and is meant to be fused with our human personality. Because we have two souls, a human soul, which is condemned to death unless it is saved by something deeper, and then what we can call the divine soul spirit, which in principle is just a seed or an embryo or a baby. It depends on the person. You have to cross a process of development, which is the ladder. Now, you enter the way when you are born as a spiritual baby. As long as you are an embryo, you are just in the wilderness, like the Israelites. And remember that even when you are born, you can lose everything, like the Israelites. They started to worship the golden calf, because you can find many false teachings and get lost in the way. So you also have to know how you can get lost. This is very important. You find traces of this teaching in myths. Joseph Campbell, the great mythologist, spoke of the hero's journey. And he even wrote a famous book known as The Hero of 1,000 Faces. And he spoke of the thresholds. The first threshold is when you listen to the voice, to the call, and you find the wise man that guides you, and you also receive some gifts, and you perform or even watch some miracles. But those are just the first stages. Then you have to go a long way in which you can get lost. That's not the true way yet. We have to climb the ladder, remember. So in the ladder, we are separating the false from the truth. Once you find the truth, you will face a trial of fire, because the true master will start to ask you to make a choice. Do you love me, or do you love the world with its passions? Do you love your selfish desires? Do you love your traitors, your unfaithful egos? Or do you really love me? That's the true master within, which is an emanation from the Holy One, and is meant to purify our human soul and integrate the divine consciousness which was lost, trapped in our subconscious. So that's the maiden that has to be rescued. And in this process, we have to know very well not only the obstacles, but also the sort of feelings and experiences we might have. For instance, it's possible to lose everything as you are climbing up the ladder. This almost happened to me when I forgot about inner work around 2012, when I got slightly lost. And after being many years working even with others, I experienced a stage of hopelessness, and this led me to health problems in which I had to learn or relearn many things and remember that I had already been looking for the way even in other existences. This is not the first time I'm here. I have seen other versions of Fernando in other timelines. I have already spoken about this. And in these timelines, the process got aborted. In this timeline, it continued. Because your soul self, your true self, reproduces the personality in a timeline which is more or less the same, even though everything changes because of the movements of space-time. So different astrological influences can make things different. Even if you are born in the same family with the same parents, having more or less the same experiences, you can have great differences. Sometimes you might even lose the track of the true path and the true way. This is why it's so important to remember where you are, what you really wish, which is expressing your true self, your true mission on earth. Now, I would like to show a few diagrams so you can understand all this visually. The process of growth is very much like going from a seed that is planted on the human being. This seed becomes an embryo. This embryo is born like a baby. This is to be born from the water. And this baby, in the beginning, is someone that demands milk. And we can see all this in the famous diagram known as Jacob's ladder, which is mentioned in the Torah.